Hello and welcome back to the Nginx Mastery series. My name is Xander, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to create a secure link with an expiry date. In the previous tutorial we created a secure link. If you have missed any of the previous tutorials, you can go ahead to the main channel, go to playlists and have a look for the Nginx Mastery series. I will take you through this step by step, but it can be good to go back to some of the previous tutorials, grab a little bit of context, and that might help enhance your understanding of this tutorial. In the previous tutorial, we created a secure link, and that was essentially a static secure link in that once we've created the secure link, it could be potentially passed to other people and they could use it. And that could be then utilized for an indefinite amount of time. In the previous tutorial, we created this secure link, and you can see that we generated a hash key, and that hash key was generated from two properties or parameters, and that was the URL and a secret string that we generated. In this tutorial, essentially we add to that mix a date, and we can use that date as an expiry date. So we can generate a hash key which has an expiry date. So the date isn't the only parameter we could add into this mix. We could secure our URL further by potentially adding the IP address of the user so that only that user with that IP address can access this link. So we can take this further, but in this tutorial, we're just going to focus on creating a secure URL that expires. You can follow along in this tutorial. There is a link in the video description which will take you to the Nginx Mastery series code repository here, and then we're going to work from part 11. That was a previous tutorial, secure URL. So go ahead and download that if you want to follow along. Open that in Visual Studio Code. You will need Docker Desktop installed if you haven't already got that already, and then we'll start from there. So I've opened up part 11, I think it is, in the repository. Here it is. Everything should be ready to go. So we're just going to expand upon this. Now, if you are completely new to this series, then like I said, you can go back in previous tutorials and I'll take you through this step by step, but it isn't necessarily important for you to follow along completely in this tutorial. I will take you through this step by step. Right, so let's go ahead and run this. So we should be able to run this straight off. Should take a couple of seconds. So we've made a few different containers here, and these two containers really are a legacy here in this tutorial series, so we can ignore the Django and DNS. However, if you want to utilize DNS, I think it's the first or second tutorial, I'll just take you through how I set that up. So we're just running a local DNS server. So once you've got the containers up and running, I do have the Docker Desktop extension here, so I can view the containers inside Visual Studio Code. Once you've got that going, you can see that we have an endpoint here. So if you go into the config here in Nginx, you can see the configuration. So we have an endpoint member, and then what happens here, we're using rewrite, and essentially what's happening then, we're using this location block then, and we're going to then access the home directory. So the home directory is a reference point to the container, the folder system on the container here in our Nginx container. And then what we're going to do is that's the root. So then we go to /secure. So it would be /home in the folder directory on Nginx /secure. And then that then takes you into this folder system here. And then we have a new folder called file and then a file called test. And that's what we're trying to secure. Again, if you're not familiar, in the Docker file here, we've created a volume. So we're mapping across this folder, this secure folder, over to our Docker container. And that just makes it easier for us to work within our Docker container and maybe add new files, etc. here. Again, this is all explained in the previous tutorial if you want to go back and have a look at that first. Okay, so we know that. So we've started the server because we can see that from our containers are up. So we're going to go to member. Let's just go over to /member. And you can see that we return forbidden. And the reason why that is because we haven't actually passed over our secure link. So we tried to go to member here. And what's happening here is that Nginx returns nothing. So we've captured that with an if statement here, and we return to the customer a 403 to basically remind them that they're not allowed to access this folder without the secure key. So in the previous tutorial, we created a secure key by utilizing a few different parameters. And those parameters was a secure link secret, which we just made up. So this is just a random set of numbers and letters. And then we also utilized the URL. So you can see here, we utilized Python to create our secret key here, our hash. And so I've gone into the console. I'll just quickly show if you're not familiar with this. So Python 3. So we just go over to we're using the built-in hash lib. So let's import that. And then you can see I've put it here, save you having to type it out. So you can see what we're going to do here. We're creating this hash utilizing the file extension. So that refers to here the file test, and then also the key. So why file test and not secure file test? Well, that's because we've already got that there. So the root starts with /home, and then the location adds to it /secure. And then we're in now this folder here. So all we need to do then is go to file folder and then the test.mp3. So you need to make sure you kind of align that up if you're not familiar with working like this. So with that in place, we generate our key, and now we can utilize this key here. Go back into our URL. So it's member / and then we need to remember the file extension, or sorry, the folder. So file and then the file. So it's just test.mp3, and that should then give us access to the file. So like I alluded to in the preview, the problem is here is that this is just a static link, which anyone can now share and use. So this will have some use cases, of course, but in this tutorial, what we're going to do now is add some different parameters to create our hash, and that's going to be the date. So we're going to be able to set a date, and we're going to use that as an expiry date for the link. So customers are now going to be presented with a link which they can use for a certain amount of time. That's going to create a secure link that's a little bit more flexible and also a little bit more secure. Now, not to say that that's the most secure way of creating links, because of course the user could still utilize that link to share with others. But the point here is we're just working towards a much secure way of working. We're just going through the motions, making sure that we understand the steps. Now, the date isn't the only item in actual fact we could use here. We could also add some other parameters, for example, the client's IP address, and utilize that to build the hash so that the user accessing that link must have that IP address. And I mean, that can be sometimes problematic, the way that IP addresses work, and potentially if people are using proxy servers, VPNs, etc., that can maybe cause problems. Okay, so let's get going. So we're going to remove the secure link here. So we're going to add two parameters. So we're going to use secure link. We're going to define two parameters here, or two variables, sorry. That's going to be the MD5. And then also we're going to define the expiry. So two variables here we set. So what we've done here essentially is we've created two variables in the secure link directive here, and that's going to allow us to capture the arguments in the request URL. Now, if we wanted to add more here, so for example, IP address, we could just extend this. So now we're going to utilize the secure link MD5. So the secure link MD5 directive basically defines the expression that is hashed to generate the MD5 value for the request. So let's just bring this in, MD5, and now we just need to define how this is made up. So this is going to be made up of a random set of numbers, a string, and then we need to define the URL, and then finally the secure link expiry date. So we're going to use secure link expires. So I have been babbling a bit. Let me just break this down. Apologies. The secure link MD5, what we're defining here. So essentially what we're doing is in the URL, we're going to pass in a hash key and also the expiry date. And so we're going to capture that in the URL. That's what the user is going to utilize in the URL. And basically what we're doing now is we're basically capturing all that. And the secure link MD5 is going to allow us to define what parameters we want to then check against and compare against the value that should be utilized in order to access that resource. Like I said previously, we could also add some client information, for example, their IP address, and that would obviously further secure the link because it would be tied to the actual customer's IP address. But like I said, that can be problematic because potentially if the customer bought the product, say if they're buying products and we're providing secure links, if they bought it at work or on their phone and they go onto a laptop at home, then potentially they're not going to be able to download it because they're not using the same IP address. So we need to think about that further if you are thinking about utilizing the IP address here. Okay, so that's it. That's all we need to do. There is one more item here, which I'll do shortly. We need to create another if statement, but we'll do that shortly. Now let's get rid of the rewrite. We're not going to need that in this case. So therefore, we're not going to need the location block here. So we can remove that. Yeah, and there we go. I say that. We now need a root. So let's change our root here. So /home. So this root here is referring to /home. That's a directory on the container, on the Nginx container. And inside of that directory, you'll find the secure folder. If you want to actually look at it, go into Docker here. If you're using the Docker extension, you can go into files. So we can go to home here. This is on the container, and you can see we've got the secure folder, the file folder, and then the test here. And like I said, because we have a volume here, we can add things here and it will appear in the container. So that's the link that we're going to be utilizing here, or the root. So please note this is a minimal configuration, so I haven't included other elements here. I just wanted really to highlight this block and what we're trying to do. Okay, right, so let's go ahead and create a new file. We're going to call that file secure link. Generator, whatever you want to call it, but we're just going to create a function here which is going to create a secure link. So generate secure link, and we're going to pass in a few things. So the secret, that's the kind of string that we generate, random string, to help protect everything, the URL, and also the expiry date. Now, it is possible, if you have a look at some of the Nginx documentation, you don't have to utilize Python. Here I've chosen to use Python because in the next tutorial we're going to utilize this in Django to generate secure links, and I'm going to show you how you can utilize Django and Nginx together to create secure links. So now we need to tie the information so we can then pass it in to be hashed. So let's create a variable here called link equals, and we use the f string to bring in secret. So this is how we're going to generate the string essentially that's going to be hashed. So the information we're using is the secret. That's the secret key that we randomly generated. The URL, in this case, the URL is just going to be, because we're already insecure, it's just going to be file and then index. It doesn't have to be a folder. It can just be the name of the file. So I could change the root to this folder here in the configuration and just use the file extension or the file name. And then the expiry date. Okay, so that's kind of the string format we've generated now that we're going to pass in to be hashed. So let's do that. So hash. Now, at this point, we're going to need to bring in some tools. So I'll just do that. So we're going to import base 64. We're going to need to import hashlib. we're going to need date time potentially, and then we'll import time. So here we're going to create an MD5 hash. So we're going to say equals hash lib, and then we're going to use md5.md5. Okay, so we need to define what we want to actually hash. So we're going to take our link here. We're just going to cast into string. So we'll say link, and then we need to encode that into UTF-8. So let's say dot encode UTF-8. So just to give you some context here, why are we using, for example, encode? Well, the thing is to hash here with MD5. MD5 is probably expecting a certain format of data. Now, at the moment, what we have here probably is some sort of Unicode object rather than a sequence of bytes in a string object, although we're using string here. So encoding this string into a sequence of bytes, for example, utilizing UTF-8, allows us to basically just format this in preparation so it can then be utilized by the MD5 hash. So this is an area of learning a little bit more about Unicode, ASCII characters, and coding. Have a look at the Python documentation. There isn't too much to read really in terms of I've seen on the Nginx documentation. I guess it is what it is ultimately, but that's kind of the area that you'd need to kind of read through if you wanted to learn a little bit more about this. So have a look at Unicoding, understand a little bit more about ASCII characters and encodings. So next up, we have to essentially just format this data. Oh, actually, I missed something here. Encoding, and what we need next? Okay, so we need digest. So here we're just essentially, without going into any detail, we're just formatting and preparing our data so we can move this forward. And the next thing that we need to do is apply a base 64 encoding. So again, we're just formatting our data in a way that then can be utilized correctly. So we're going to use the base 64 hash here equals base 64 dot URL safe bytecode, and that is then pass in our hash here. And then once we've done that, we can then go ahead and decode. So string hash equals base 64 hash dot decode UTF-8, and then we can use the rstrip. So we have a three-step process, right? We've used MD5 to generate an MD5 hash, I think in binary format, and then we've gone ahead and we've used base 64 to encode the hash value in base 64. And then we finally then just prepared the data, removing any equal symbols that may have appeared in the output. We basically just then prepared that ready to be utilized in the URL. So now we can just go ahead and return. So we're going to return an F string, which is going to be the URL that you can then utilize to actually secure to get the data. So we're going to prepare the URL, so URL, and then we're going to be using MD5 equals. So MD5, where does that come from? Well, if you look at the default config here, that's the first argument, MD5, and the second one is called expires. So we need to match that up. So MD5 equals, and that's going to be the string hash. Okay, so that's what we've prepared here. And then secondly, so we're going to need an and that's going to be expires equals expiry. So that's what we pass in, which we need to generate shortly. Okay, so that's the actual link that we can then use to access the file. All right, so that's what we return. So now we need to set up some variables here. So let's go for secret equals. So that just basically needs to match the secret that we're using here. We're passing in. So we'll just copy that. It's a secret. And then we need the URL. So that's the path, the folder, the file location. So in our case, it's /filetest.mp3. So that might obviously change for your situation, but you can see that the root takes us to secure folder, and then we finish that off with /file and then test.mp3. So now we need a date. So a date time. So let's say date time equals. Now we did bring in date time here, and I was meaning to do a date time tutorial actually, because this is something that I always tend to forget. So it'd be a good tutorial for myself to keep reminding myself. So there's plenty of ways of doing this. We're going to just generate a static date at the moment. You can go ahead and maybe create dates more dynamically based upon the length of time you want to generate a secret link for. But for this example, I'm just going to use date time here. Datetime.datetime, and then we can define the date and time. So say 2023, that's when it expires, of the 12th month, and on the 30th day, and then we can set the time, so 00, 24-hour clock, so 00. So that's when the link is going to expire. So I'm just going to do that manually, and then we need to just prepare that. Expiry equals is going to be an integer, because this would alternatively, I think off the top of my head, it would produce a float. So I'm just going to cast that into an integer. So here we're generating an Epoch Time, which if you haven't come across that before, it's well worth having a look at that. So Epoch, so EPOCH, and that basically is a time format describing a point in time. And how it does that, it is a number of seconds that have elapsed since the Nginx epoch, which is set, I think, at midnight on the 1st of January 1970. So basically it calculates the time from that point to give you an exact time in seconds from that point, and that's a way of then working out the date and time. Okay, so go and have a look at that. It's an interesting and very popular way of working to measure precise time in programming in programs. Right, so what we're going to do here is we're utilizing time.mkTime. Okay, so basically that is going to expect 9 different inputs, or 9 elements corresponding to time date, and then it will use that to then convert the time that we pass in into epoch time, which off the top of my head is essentially going to be a number which is expressing how many seconds has passed since the date I mentioned, so the 1st of January 1970. Okay, so mkTime is going to return a number in seconds passed since epoch time, and that basically is going to then be utilized to measure the expiry date. Right, so what we're going to need to do is pass in our date time. So we do that, date time here, and then we need to prepare the data in a format that can be utilized by mkTime. So we're going to use time tuple. So that's going to prepare our data in preparation, and yeah, that's it. So that's our date prepared. So now we can go ahead and just print this off. So print generate secure link, and we just pass in the secret, the URL, and then also the new expiry time. Okay, so we run this. Let's just exit that, And then let's run this file. It should then generate our secure link. Or not. What am I doing wrong? Okay, so I can see the problem here. We're decoding here. We used a decode, not encode. So we need to change that to encode, not decode. We're decoding here. Okay, so I made that small change. So let's go ahead and try that out. And there we go. So we now have our URL. So let's go ahead and go back to our container. We'll just attach a shell and we'll restart. We can just restart the container, of course. So Nginx reload. You can see that there's an issue here with the configuration. Probably forgotten, yep, for a semicolon there. So we'll give that a go. Okay, so we still have a problem on line 6. Secure link. So let's just remove that. Okay, so unknown variable URL. So here is suggesting, yeah, because it should say URI, apologies. And then the next one, and there we go. So those are all the changes that we need to make. Fairly simple to debug this. It seems to be very much in plain sight. It directs me to the line. Very simple to solve. Apologies about that. So that's the final code there. So let's go ahead. Oh, we've already reloaded. So now we're ready to go. So that doesn't affect the link that we generated here. So go back here. So it won't affect this at all. So let's go and have a look to see if it works. Okay, so back in my browser here, I'm just gonna paste that in. So that will need to be file. Okay, so let me make a few different changes here, just double check this. Yep, so you can see here at the moment we've got the location as member, so I'm going to change that to file, which is going to represent this folder here. So the root is going to be home secure, home, which you can't see, secure, and then the folder file, and then inside of that should be the test file. So we give that a go. And it says not found because I haven't reloaded. So I go back into the shell. Remember, this is the container. So the Docker shell container here. I'm just going to reload and then give that a refresh. And there we go. So we can check this is working by just changing, for example, the expiry time here, or for example, our hash. Give that a go and you can see that we receive forbidden. So that's being captured, remember, through this if statement, and we can now generate a new if statement because we want to now also tell the user if, for example, the link has expired, potentially we want to return a different error. So we can say secure link, and then we can return, for example, a 410. Now, if the expire link has expired, then it's going to return 0. So that's what we're going to capture, and then we go ahead and we return to the user a 410. So we can see this in action. Let's go back into our generator here. So let's just set this at 2019, which is obviously past. Let's go ahead and generate a new link for that, and we'll give this a go. So we just update and reload Nginx. And then we try and pass in a date that has expired. And you can see now it's expired, so it's gone. Okay, there we have a secure link, which with an expiry date. Now, like I said, we could add more to that, and it'd be well worth having a look at documentation if you're interested in that. In the next tutorial, I think I'm going to try and apply that to Django so that we can automatically generate links temporarily. It's just going to be a small example of kind of embellishing that inside of a template. That might be something you're interested in, and then we move forward from there. So thank you very much for listening. Hope to see you in the next tutorial. If you've got any questions, please let me know. Always good to get your feedback. I was trying to give you enough information, but not go into too much specifics there. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts and ideas on if maybe I should present a little bit more, or maybe there should be more visuals to what I'm talking about, or whether you're comfortable just going and reading yourself, or whether you need more links and examples. So just let me know. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.